Hello and welcome. It's lovely to see so many familiar names. I say that every time, but it's, I think, more so the case today than ever. So lovely you could all be with us on such a glorious day. I'm sure everyone in the UK is saying that today. I'm Laura, I am your host for this session, and today I'm quite excited. We're diving into a topic that is cropping up in almost every single conversation we have with clients at the moment, and that is change. So I actually thought I'd start off in true Ivy House style with a few stats that frame why this is such an important topic. Some of these shocked me, and I'm interested to know if you have a reaction to them too. So the first is 90% of organisations are undergoing some kind of change programme. It's probably not a shock to you, hence you're all here today, but 70% of those programmes fail. That's fascinating to me, and even more fascinating, actually, particularly knowing the size of organisations lots of you work in. For larger businesses, so those over 1,000 employees, 38% of leaders say they would rather quit than lead another change programme. Wow. So that says something, doesn't it? Because change is no longer an occasional thing. It's constant, it is complex, and it is deeply human. And at Ivy House, we obviously spend a lot of time helping organisations with the human side of leadership and change. And done right, that can be catalytic. So today we are going to be unpacking what it really takes to lead a successful change agenda. And we are joined by two brilliant guests who know quite a lot about this. So Natalie Benjamin is CEO of Ivy House. Natalie, do you want to give a quick 1-minute intro to who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, absolutely. I often say I'm never shocked by change statistics, but that's a new one to me. 38% would rather quit than lead another change. Goodness me, what a context. I'm a performance coach, I'm a leadership development consultant. I often say that I'm an accidental career consultant. I didn't even know what consulting was 20 years ago when I studied languages in university. But I've got a particular interest, having worked in this field for a long time, about human performance and a deep belief that performance starts with the human, and a particular interest in how that shows up during change, constant change, transformation, etc. I can do look more, Laura, about it, but I'm wondering if this is just my intro.
Just your intro, leave them wanting more. That's perfect. Thank you, Natalie. And Lucy, who is here against, I think, the M4's wishes, head of learning at Heathrow. Lucy, you're happy to do an intro as well?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It was a little bit challenge, Annika, this morning when the M4 was at a standstill, but I've made it. Very excited to be here. I work as the head of learning at Heathrow.
Amazing. Thank you, Lucy. So today, actually, we decided to run it as a conversation. We don't typically do events in this way, but essentially I'm going to hand over to Natalie and Lucy, who will be sharing their thoughts, everything they know about change, and actually give you an insight into the huge change agenda happening at Heathrow. I learned this morning, the busiest international airport in the world. So we're thrilled to have you with us, Lucy. Thank you. We're going to open up for questions at the end. So my ask is, if you've got a question, type it in the chat. We have a team here who will field those questions and put them to our speakers at the end. If we don't have time to answer your question, we will come back to you after today with answers, so still type them. That is it from me for now. Natalie, I'm going to hand over to you to start the conversation.
Thank you so much. And in preparation for this session, I actually did what felt like quite a cathartic reflection. I started to think about my experience of change through 3 different lenses, and I realised there were 3 types of change that had an impact on me. I think just people could pop themselves on mute if you haven't already. So from the first perspective, I thought quite work-like, and I thought about the consulting lens. And the work I've done with leaders. I've been on big change programs, one of the largest transactions in history, complex change programs. As a leader, I thought about it from a leadership lens. I'm now at a stage of my career, or at an age, where I've led quite a bit of change, lots successfully, I'd like to think, and I'm sure some not as successful as they could have been. And then I thought about it through a personal lens, and we've all experienced change constantly, so experiencing it both professionally and personally, and all comes with that. I actually had the sort of realization lots of the hardest times of my life, both professionally and personally, have been related to this topic of change. And then I reminded myself that 20 years ago I started working in a consultancy, to support the curation of content for a journal, the first journal this organisation had produced. And the name of the journal was Riding the Wave of Change. And I was like, goodness me. So I started work 20 years ago. We know that the rate of failed change initiatives is still incredibly high. And I started to go, why is that still the case? And I know lots of you on this call will have experiences and perspectives on that. So then I started to tune into, what do I hear from leaders? I'm working with leaders quite a lot, often at exec level, leading complex change. And what I'm constantly surprised at is some of the reactions I hear from leaders leading change. So I hear surprise from leaders that their people didn't see this coming. I hear surprise from some leaders that people responded badly or emotionally, I guess. And then I guess at its worst, and we've all been part of it, and I'm sure I've done it as well, a whole bunch of what I'm now terming othering. It's the culture, it's them, it's all these. And again, no judgment from me. It is hard. Change is hard. I guess what I've reflected on is that the people side of change is still grossly overlooked. And what do I mean by that? It's still commonly ending up as a work stream only, so to speak, in a large transformation effort. I'm not convinced that we're truly unpacking with leaders this difference between change as an event, if you like, a thing that's commonly imposed or decided, and that really messy human side that goes alongside it, that actual emotional transition. And I guess on that word emotion, I'm not sure we're paying anywhere enough attention to the emotional side of change. And in fact, the term I'm sort of coining around that is the emotional labour of change. We often talk at Ivy House around leadership being high in emotional labour by a big number, if you like, when it comes to change. So the emotional labour of leading change is even harder. When I see human leaders, and that's where we focus our attention, brilliant human leaders during change, I see them adapting and responding really optimistically to change. And that doesn't mean blind optimism, but they can show optimism. They can communicate clearly and empathetically, even during really tough messaging, which is commonly part of complex change. They can resolve challenges and conflicts, etc., etc. So I still think there's this huge case for human leadership in the transformation space, notwithstanding that once you have those core skills, those core human skills, we might call them, there are so many other competencies and skills, complex change management, everything we know about the need for increased data and digital fluency, those are all in the mix as well. So I guess on the reflections I've had both personally and professionally, and I guess, Lucy, I'm delighted to have you here as part of this conversation today. My first question to you is, when you prepared for this session, and we had a couple of prep sessions as well, what did the topic conjure up for you in the first instance?
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. It's interesting because I liked how you described sort of how it's impacted you at a personal level, you know, in a work environment, and how you've led change as a leader yourself. I think out of what you just said, that emotional labour of change really resonated. And it's interesting because I think on a personal level, I feel like I'm someone who likes change and, you know, likes the excitement of things evolving. I'm really energized by that. But then also I've come to realize I also really crave certainty. And I don't know if it's as I'm getting older, I've got, you know, kids, busier life than I used to have, much more responsibilities. So I guess on a personal level, I've noticed I am having to be more intentional about the support I might need to navigate change, and also just with people around me, that everyone responds differently, right? On a human level, my family respond differently. We've got school changes and all sorts going on at home, and I think it's recognizing that human experience, as you said, and that no two journeys are the same.
When the craving certainty of that's a common threat response, isn't it? Our need for autonomy, certainty, those things, and we see it thrown up with leaders all the time. What about from a work perspective? If I were to ask you, I know we're going to come on to the Heathrow context, but to cycle back on change initiatives you've been involved in, is there anything that, before we look forward, anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, a memory's come up recently of actually a project I did quite a few years ago. And it was back in my consultancy days, many years ago, definitely Life Before Children. I remember it was an exciting one because we were working with a European large FMCG business, if I've said the acronym right. And they were leading a big cultural transformation across Europe. They had a new vision and they really wanted to inspire a different mindset across everyone in their business. I think the things that I recall and keep coming back to me from that experience was the leadership and the importance of two things. First of all, at the beginning of that project, they weren't all clear on what that vision really meant, even though they came up with it. So I remember going out and interviewing them and they all had different versions of it. And so a starting point was, can we all get clear on what this really means and what this looks like? And the second big difference, I mean, at the time they deemed it, massively successful engagement event, probably gone on to do bigger and better things. But, we did this massive, big communications roadshow to support that group of people. And I think the thing that made the single biggest difference is the leadership visibility, because we had 2 members of that senior leadership team at every single event. And I mean, this took 6 months to go across loads of locations, countries. And the thing that made the biggest difference to people was chatting and spending time with those senior leaders, those members of that senior leadership team. And I think I've carried that lesson with me since, when I think about any change that we're doing. How do we get that level of visibility and really lead from the top?
And you're actually talking about more than just visibility, aren't you? What I heard you say there was real conversations.
Real conversations,
and really aligning around. And I've come across it a few times, the sort of words on a piece of paper that look great in terms of a vision, but what does that really mean for people?
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us a little bit about the Heathrow transformation agenda, the change agenda that you're facing into now. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, sure. And I guess, people in the UK who are watching the news, I'm sure you've heard that the government have asked us to look at a potential third runway. So obviously, there is potential expansion there, which obviously, is going on. But I guess behind the scenes, there's a lot of focus on how do we make sure we've got an extraordinary airport fit for the future. That's sort of our internal vision. And on the people side, and particularly in my world in learning, I guess we're looking at what does that fit for the future capability, mindset, culture look like, and what's our part in that. So I think our workforce, it's fair to say, we've got a lot of tenure, we've got a lot of experience in the aviation industry, we've got a hugely complex business. And some of the things on horizon and the fast pacing moving of technology, in particular AI, and all the things that we are talking about and starting to use, we've got a real job to equip leaders both on those sides, but also thinking about what the workforce now need from leaders and that different side of culture. And we've focused a lot about culture in recent years. I think the bit we're turning our attention to at the moment is probably really honing in on some of those more strategic business skills as well, and ultimately still making sure that human-centered leadership is right at the heart of it.
Yeah, I really noticed when you're talking, and we've talked a few times about this as well, but the context of change really matters, the context of that organisation. So you've got talking about the complexity of the operating model, the tenure, the external scrutiny, that all comes into it. When you're starting out on this journey with your learning hat in mind, what are you doing to make sure it's successful? What's your remit in that? You've touched on it a bit. You've started with culture. What else will set you up for success, do you think?
Yeah, and I think I'll just briefly allude to some parts of colleagues in the wider people team are playing, because it is, it's an exciting time at the moment where we've got some sprints that are running in the people team. So we're really looking at the role sort of technology plays to enable us to better support people, so we can support people more on a strategic level. We're also looking at sort of future skills and how roles are going to be evolving. But I guess front and center for learning, we're trying to really understand first and foremost, where are we today? Because we've got our strategy, we know what we're working towards, we've got various different elements that we've got to be thinking about. I think the really grounding piece that we've done over the last 6 months is a piece of research, and actually Ivy House have obviously kindly supported us with some of the data analysis, but we've done a real holistic look at where are our leaders today an important part of that is research and interviewing those leaders. So me and some of my team have interviewed our senior level to understand sort of where do they feel they are in terms of comfort level to lead the strategy and their teams. What gaps do they see? And we've been listing out for what they know about themselves, but also what they don't know as well. And we've got, you know, very diverse sort of leadership team in terms of experience and capability. We've also, I think, really interestingly is looked at all the holistic data we've got in and around our leaders as well. So what does our engagement scores say? We've done some work on emotional competencies, and everyone has had their own EQ 360, which is a really exciting piece of work. So we've kind of looked at that data. We've looked at our exit data. We've kind of looked at real all in view of where is that leadership experience today. And so that is going to then inform what we then look to go forward as we're defining the future as well. We've got that real clear view of where we are today, and also how people are feeling about change. And you know, so it's always refreshing when you interview people. I always worry people are going to be candid, and they typically are. When you set it up right, you can have those honest conversations. If some of our leaders might not be clear on what the strategy means to them, or they don't have experience in this part. So yeah, I mean, I could talk all day, Natalie. I'm conscious of time, so I'll let you funnel me.
Tell us more about the attitude to change. I don't know if attitude's the right word, but I guess the mindset to change that you've noticed or experienced in the organization, and how do you tune into that?
I think it's mixed. I think it depends on where people are coming from, right? It's back to that human, their point in their career right now, their experience, their background. So I think a lot of it depends on also where they sit in the business. And we've got, a lot of our colleagues and leaders sit in the operational part of the business. It's probably an 80% operational focus, 20% more kind of corporate strategic. And we're a regulated safety critical business. So that inevitably, and I'm sure, I don't know if we've got anyone for financial services, but there's similar industries where that regulation causes more cautious, risk averse culture. That's natural, that's necessary. I think what we're trying to do is work out where are we able to move faster, take bigger bets, especially in areas like leadership, digital innovation. And I think a really interesting bit from that leadership insight I shared was we realised that leaders with less than 5 years experience at Heathrow showed higher optimism and agility. So it's quite interesting compared to those people that have been here longer, because I think I did have a bit of a spidey sense that, those that potentially had been around Heathrow longer and maybe those that hadn't had as much exposure were a little bit more resistant to change. So it was interesting to see the data back that up. And I think it's just really important to tap into where those leaders are, as well, as much as we've got to bring their people on different change journeys. We've got to make sure we're equipping those leaders, and we're thinking about where they are and where they're showing up.
How are you going to equip them? So what I've heard is, and I'm privileged to have been close to some of that data alongside you, how will you focus your attention? How will you equip leaders? Because you've done quite a lot of rich insight. Where do you start? Where do you start?
Well, we're kind of in the throes of it. I do not have all the answers. We're working up a bit of a proposal literally this week, and we're in front of the CPO week Friday to take her through our ideas. So I think we have already been focusing massively. Probably for 10 years now. I've been at Heathrow 3 years, but on culture, on a real values-led leadership. So it felt like on that front we're ahead of the game, and we've just been through a journey of the last couple of years, again really reinforcing that. So I think that feels like we've got that right. I think we have seen a shift where we've got new CEO, we've got new executive members. We're probably moving to more of a performance focus, and I guess more commercially minded, like a more of a commercial mindset, I'd say. And I think that does feel different for some of our leaders. So the focus is probably more on business skills, I would say, actually, and how do we make sure we keep those rich cultural foundations and get that balance right of how do we become more commercially astute, more focused, more performance focused, but still really leading our people in the right way. And I think that is a really nuanced balance. And there's some work going on to really define what does a high performance inclusive culture look like. I don't know if that is language, if that's Heathrow specific, but I know we're defining that at the moment. And also I'd say from a learning perspective, we're trying to shift from the learning team kind of pushing everything out to kind of trying to shift that mindset to more of growth mindset, always on lifelong learning. And so with the work that the next phase of leadership development we're planning, we're looking at how do we really move from that push to that pull, really well marketed learning that in particularly really hits the mark for those performance problems leaders are facing. And that's where the insight piece, I think, comes into its own, because we know what they're struggling with. But there's also an element of, for those leaders, and I'm sure we've all got them, who are maybe, maybe they think they're the finished article, less above the line thinking. Those are the ones that there's also that expectation setting, I think, from our executive team and from our senior leaders around, actually, we're talking about fit for the future, we're talking about extraordinary, we're raising the bar, and almost, we've got to kind of embody that kind of growth mindset, if you like. So I definitely see exec sponsorship being a massive part of this next journey as well, because I would say some of my learning over the last few years is, if it's initiative that's been seen as driven by the learning team or the people team, people are less interested. So yeah, that's the other big factor, I'd say, that shift in terms of learning culture.
And tell me what things you think will make that shift possible. Well, I suppose we've gone there, haven't we? We've gone with the exec, we've gone push to pull. Let's fast forward then. Let's imagine what's the right time frame, Lucy? Imagine you're 18 months down the line now, and I recognise that you've done lots of the groundwork, you're bringing with you lots of experience. Tell us what you think leaders will be doing differently 18 months from now.
Okay.
How will you gauge that?
And it will be here in no time. I think I'm really excited at the moment, because we've got some exciting plans that, as I say, we're very much in draft stages. So as long as the CPO loves the plans in a week or two, I think I'm really excited about seeing a real shift in our leaders, especially those that might have been here a while and not had as much exposure externally. And I really want to see that hunger and curiosity in their eyes to really feel that learning culture starting to come to life. I think we haven't got that learning culture yet, so I'm under no illusion that's probably sort of a 2, 3, 4 year journey, but it'd be good to start to see that. And for leaders to become more confident, more connected, really leaning in, and not necessarily wanting to always be that polished article, and being really human about their own change, because I think that is really inspiring for their people. And I guess ultimately I hope that it doesn't feel like we're just running another program, but we're really on that wave, back to that wave of change, Natalie, you talked about, that real momentum in how people lead, think and grow.
Thank you. I can see I could ask you more questions, and I'm conscious there've been quite a few questions that have come through, and I know that part of the attraction of this conversation is hearing from you and getting the opportunity to speak to like-minded people. So I'm going to ask the team some of the questions. I think we've got plenty of time to go through some questions. So
we do.
Brian, as long as you're answering them too, Natalie, right?
Well, we'll work it out, won't we?
Okay, good.
I haven't read them, but I've seen a few cropping up. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, there's been a real curiosity around why change is failing and what are the reasons behind that. So Joel opened with a question: are change efforts really failing so dismally, or is it that targets, objectives, and the context are changing faster than organisations can execute on planned changes? I'd love to hear both your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Joel. It sounds like you've probably got a perspective as well, so it'd be great to hear yours. I was working with an exec team recently in the higher education sector, and we were talking about their role leading change. And they ended up getting into a bit of they recognised it, spiral, describing this organisation's inability to do change well, and we know change doesn't work. And in the end, we got them talking about what aspects have gone well, because it's quite easy to think it's gone badly because it's so challenging, and because it can lead, I guess, a cultural footprint, or I guess some emotional baggage. And of course, that it should be part of the success criteria, right? Because if it leaves people feeling a certain way that affects their behaviour and their performance, then of course I recognise that is not complete success. And I think there are lots of change initiatives going well and deliver change outcomes, but that because it's hard, it's challenging, and it leaves baggage, it's hard to tick them as completely successful. So that's my experience, Joe. I'm interested in your perspective, and you're talking about constant layered change and perhaps not enough space for the change to be embedded. I don't know, Lucy, if you've got a perspective before we ask others.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking that, do we take the time, as you said, to just stop, recognize? I think we're so busy sometimes on to the next thing, if we really missed those amazing achievements that we've had. And I also wonder whether there's just this agility that we've got to move from seeing everything as separate change programs to what does that sort of ongoing cycle look like? Because I guess, change programs used to happen in a more linear way, and now there's that shift to more culturally accepting that agile change is maybe we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, and we're noticing, aren't we? All of us will be noticing multiple change initiatives happening in one organisation, and to what extent are they being orchestrated as one change, because they're affecting lots of people. Many changes touch one person. I'd be interested to look actually myself at more data around successful change initiatives and how they're measured. The question we've just had throws up, how are we measuring success of change initiatives? Just something for us to think about.
When you get those answers, please share the secret sauce with all of us.
And then we had a question from Elaine as to what extent is change resistant triggered by will, skill, hill thinking? So I don't want to, I don't know how to, I don't have bandwidth.
Yeah, some of the work. So say the question again, so Bryony, the beginning. To what extent is
change resistance triggered by that type of thinking?
The work I'm ending up doing with lots of the teams I'm working with is exploring why change resistance arrives. And I often talk, and again, we talk in a non-judgmental way, because we are all hardwired as humans to differing degrees to view change as a threat, because it saves. Noticing threat is key to survival of us as a species. Again, I'm not an expert in the neurology of the brain, but what I do know, and that what I work with our teams on, is that that's okay. So don't judge yourself. We all are hardwired to view change as a threat. And we view an event in the context of work. Our brain responds sometimes as if that is a physical threat to our life. So we are, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the SCARF model, many of you. So if our status is threatened, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. The work we do is to make people aware that that thing is happening in all of us all of the time. We need to get better at noticing it, becoming more conscious of it, recognizing which of those emotional triggers challenge us, so that we're better at leading people through them. So my experience is that's happening for all of us. Resistance is triggered by those things. It'll also be our own experiences of change. So the natural human threat responses we all have. And then if we've gone through many difficult change initiatives, we bring with us that baggage, that hangover, if you like, of pre-existing, and it informs the way we respond, right? It informs the way we respond and the way we notice. So I think will, skill, Yeah, I mean, for me, you have to start with the emotions. You have to start with what is your lived experience of change and how is that shaping the way you respond to this change? For me, capability to lead change comes a little bit after that. Of course, we need the skills and tools, but in the first instance, we need to notice our emotions related to it and then work out how we respond rather than react. And I don't suggest it's easy. I think this is hard work to be doing.
Thanks, Nat. And while we're on Elaine, who asked another brilliant question, which I think is more for Lucy, because you talked about having your exec and sponsorship of your people being really important to the change programme. She asks, is being a lifelong learner a stated cultural value to put in front and centre for all associates?
Sorry, I coughed just at the end. Is it to put on the what? Sorry, that last bit.
Is it a stated cultural value to put it in front and centre for all associates?
I like that. I think that intent has to be clear. I mean, many of us on the call today, I would imagine, work in learning and development. So, you know, that growth mindset, that learning culture comes very naturally. I think, you know, across my organization, across other organizations I've worked, I think you get a real mixed bag of that above the line or below the line thinking. So I think it is important, you know, when we come to launch sort of the next phase of some of our leadership development, that we do have, whether it's our CEO, one of the exec members on stage, really being clear about that intent. Would love it to be, you know, one of our values. You know, we'll work on that. We're quite attached to the current values. I'm sure there's one that we could link to that. But I think for those people where, whether it's their experience, it's their personality, they might naturally not be as curious, I think we've got to make that really explicit and really clear that that's expected, because leadership today is so different than, you know, and it's ongoing, right? It's forever changing. And so as leaders, we've got to have that openness to change and that hunger to know that you're never going to have all of the answers. So yeah, love that idea.
Some of you will be noticing Lucy's language. I think you've said above and below the line, which talks to a model 20-year career in consulting without talking about some models and frameworks. But one of the mindsets we try to shift to, a model we use to shift to a learning mindset, is we often show at the beginning of sessions, we show it in lots of our training workshops, and when I'm working with an exec team, I often put this model up and it's a line, and above it says motivated by learning, and below it says motivated by being right. And we encourage the discourse to take place with that mindset. Let's all be curious today. Let's all be motivated by learning. No one's here to score points. No one needs to be right. Obviously, I could have an exec team talking about that for 45 minutes, just that notion of how they show up, where they're typically drawn. I worked with a financial services organization recently, and the CEO was super vulnerable. He said, gosh, I think I go into most meetings being right or thinking about being right. And for him, that was about efficiency, getting to the right result, getting the meeting done. And so that mindset of being motivated, did you share it a couple of times? I'm sure people use similar language, but yeah, that's often where we start our conversations.
Great, thank you for clarifying that, Nat. Another question from Joel, which sort of links to this, is I also wonder to what extent changes are failing because the majority of them are initiated from the top. And how does this compete with the speed at which technology is disrupting businesses? What are the assumptions that justifies this top-down approach?
It's probably we've always done it that way, right? That's a quick response. We've always done it that way. If you think about the old, and if Elka, our founder, was here, she often talks about there used to be this playbook for leadership, right? 20, 30 years ago, a way we conform to lead. Leaders are right, leaders set direction, leaders know the right answer, know the right path, and they initiate change, and then people should get on board with the change. I simplify, right? Because I do think we've come a long way in the last decade. But for me, that mindset or bias still exists, that leaders are right or initiate the change. And we'll all know circumstances where our people are closer to the right answer or closer to the needs of the customer and the real change that needs to take place. So I think it's a good a good noticing about the way change is initiated. And I'm trying to think of all the change projects I'm working on at the moment, how many of them are initiated a different way. I'll think about that further, actually. I think it's fascinating. And Lucy, if you've got a perspective on that.
I think just
Change from the
what,
top.
yeah, I think just what popped in my head with that question is, I think if we as a learning team are brought in to support with kind of learning, often I always think that communication, engagement, learning, they kind of all overlap with each other, because I think the mindset is a massive part of it. The thing that I think makes the biggest difference, if let's say, we've got you've got a script of how whatever change is going to be communicated, but it's coming into one of our learning events or something like that. If we can influence it, the approach I find works really well is we're big on human-centered design approach. So we go out there and we spend time with the audience. Who's the end recipient of that? How do they feel about it? What's likely going to come up? And I think, 24 years in learning development, you always get those stakeholders who are below the line. They think they're right and they go, no, this is exactly what we need to do, and this is exactly how we measure it. But if you have a data-based approach to having research and knowing those audiences, knowing those different layers and what's going to land, what's going to not, you can challenge them comfortably with research. And when you're saying, well, actually this, we've interviewed this many people and this is what your people are saying, so I think we need to think about this with the context or the communication. I think that's the tip I would probably share. Research. Know your people.
When I think about behaviour change, I always think about you need some insight first and you need some strategies. I simplify it. I lead a much smaller organisation than most of you work for, and I operate in this space, right? I lead a learning organisation, and I can still get caught into some of these what we call outdated traps. So I have more time and space, and it's part of my role to think about change. What should we change? What should we do differently? Strategy. And I can get caught up into that's my job and I should be driving that, and I'm responsible for that. What we've put in place recently is a shadow leadership team, so that we can hear what changes should be happening through another lens, because otherwise, with all the good intent, I could get really caught up in, well, that's my job. People are looking to me for that. So I think there's something about stepping into the leader's shoes, why they might be doing that as well.
As you were talking, I was thinking about those moments when I get caught in my own brain. I think I've got an amazing idea, and then I float it at one of my team meetings, and it completely bombs. And so, yeah, it's important that we know we don't have all the answers, right?
Thank you. And then we've had a question from Claire. With change more ongoing and no longer being separate programmes, it's critical to continually upskill on change with our leaders and organisation. What do you feel are the key capabilities and skills we need to develop in our leaders for change and transformation?
Yeah, I love that you're talking about change readiness there, so ongoing change readiness, rather than we're going through this change, let's equip people, because it's a lag, right? To state the obvious, there's a lag there in terms of the upskilling. I was working on this last week with the team. So resilience, empathy, lots of the component parts of emotional intelligence, actually, and we work a lot in that space with a partner of ours. And that's where we start, right? You heard me start at the beginning around human leadership capabilities. That's where we start, and many of them are related to emotional intelligence. So adaptability, self-knowing, empathy, all of the softer skills as a huge foundation for some of the more strategic skills. So strategic thinking, you might need data and digital literacy, advanced change management, but I see those as the absolute foundational skills. Totally understanding your own personal experiences of change, so that every time you are leading change, you are able to tap back into, God, this is the wiring I have. These are the unhelpful thoughts that play out for me when leading change. But yeah, in short, loads of them are related to emotional capital.
We've just had a question.
I'm trying not to read them. It's really hard not to. I've got to stop. Sorry,
Shut the chat window, Natalie. Shut the chat window.
Everything might shut down if I do that.
Well, let me distract you with a question. Paul has asked, it's clear change is a constant. How do you avoid creating an environment of too much change? How can leaders navigate or influence this?
Yeah. When I think about lots of the research that's out there about change fatigue is a thing, as well as sort of change addiction. So there are leaders, and again, I try and look at it with positive intent and operating in a leadership role myself. Sometimes you think you've got to change things. That's what we do. That something needs to be changed and better. Gosh, that's a real system question, isn't it? How do we avoid too much change?
I was just thinking, Natalie, about in many organisations I've worked, sometimes you've got different parts of the organisation are responsible for different things, right? So you've got the people team, or even parts of the people team communicating about different things. You've got then the local area. I think it's making sure from a systems perspective, whether it's your communications team, your engagement person, your colleague experience person, who's got that roadmap of that change, so you can see it visually. Because sometimes I think it's just one part of the business don't talk to another part of the business, so you don't realize how much change we're landing on people. So I think to have someone seeing it,
I guess, seeing the total picture. And then working out what too much is interesting language, isn't it? What is too much for one organisation? What have they been through previously? What is the change capability that exists in organisations? There will be organisations with high levels of change readiness and change capabilities. So what's the version for your organisation of a change, like almost like the change audit, so you can understand what the lay of the land is before. How I think about it, it's a great question, because I've had the privilege, I guess you do as a consultant, on working in lots of different change contexts. And typically a similar approach is applied in all the contexts, but the context is different in each organisation, right? One might be more tolerant of change, ready for change, have experienced change done well. And all of those factors need to be considered before we go, well, let's do the change. But that's quite hard to really pay attention to the ground it's landing on, if that makes sense.
Natalie, I was wondering a question for you. Do you think sometimes we also assume, sometimes when we're thinking about who needs to know what, we maybe don't put enough thought into actually, does that affect all of those areas of the business, all of those levels? Do you think, have you seen that? Could potentially more thought to go in which, different groups need what?
Yeah. So I guess what we're talking about is gauging impact. So gauging impact in a more thorough and thoughtful way. Because of course, and again, we know this, change can have the most pressing impact on one area of the business. But don't forget, people have relationships with that part of the business. People feel scared as a result of that having changed. So there are repercussions, aren't there, and ripples, no matter how focused you think the change initiative is. So all of these questions are taking us, I guess, to a more holistic way, or a systems thinking way of looking at change.
Thank you. And Madalena has just asked, it's an interesting point on the shadow leadership team that you mentioned, Nat. What are effective ways of building strong bonds between executives and senior leaders who are mobilising teams at lower levels to execute change strategies to enable ongoing two-way dialogue, feedback, etc.?
Yeah. Great question. Again, I'm going to talk about a live example. So I'm working in a large, complex organisation that has multiple leadership teams, and some are overlapping with one another. That's not uncommon, but it doesn't mean it's simple. You've got terms of reference for different teams. You've got the executive team, and then two teams that sort of report through it, but also multiple members in each. The way we've started the work is working with the executive team and talking about first team behaviours. What does it mean to be in a home team? What do first team behaviours look like? And that's more a standard exec development journey, if you like. What's been a bit more complicated is working out what unites those three teams and what causes conflict, and having really honest and good conversations about the conflict that's needed, how we do conflict well, how we have real conversations, and recognising that a meeting is not a team. Again, I'm noticing that quite a lot. This thing happens in this meeting as if that's teaming behaviour. The team stuff should happen outside. Most recently, we had all three of those groups come together and go, what unites us? Actually, what unites us is change leadership. We are the people responsible and accountable actually for leading this organisation through transformation. So we actually did sort of a contract with those three teams about how do we show up and lead change in a united way, even though behind the scenes lots of hard stuff needs to go on to make decisions about where priority spends take place, etc. Do a lot longer on that with intricate detail. It's exciting. Hard, but exciting stuff, exciting work to be doing to get that right. I mean, we all know that the research says aligned change leadership teams are crucial to successful transformation. But you started with that story, didn't you, Lucy? Easier said than done. Do we really actually know what this change is? I've been with a senior leadership team recently. Hopefully we got to a vulnerable enough place, an open enough place, and one of the senior execs, we're still talking about change. What is the change? From what to what by when? What is this change? Because this word change is getting sort of floated around really commonly. And actually the team had slightly differing views on what that was. What is the as is and to be state? And as a senior leadership team, we're totally clear on that.
Yeah. I'm aware we're getting quite a few questions. We've got 4 minutes left, so we'll try and answer as many as we can today. If not, if you don't get your question answered today, we'll obviously come out to you and answer those later as well. But Russell has asked, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to do this in 4 minutes, but I'm going to put the question to you anyway. What approaches would you suggest to sell the benefits and invest the time required to execute these approaches to mid and senior leadership?
Yeah. You've heard me, I'll give Lucy the final words. You've heard me talk a lot today about human leadership, forming tight bonds, some of the softer skills, which I think are the really, really hard things to get right. But actually, loads of this, all of this for me is in service of performance. You won't get an effective change outcome, however you want to dress it up. You won't get the performance outcomes without paying attention to this stuff. I mean, I deeply, deeply believe this, and I know the research points in that direction as well. So there is a clear business case here for really, well, I talked at the beginning, didn't I? Don't grossly underestimate the people component, because that is what drives effective change. So anything that we end up doing that guess where we need to sell the business case, we're really focused on performance and the outcomes of the change. And this is a huge, huge enabler. I don't think I've said the word performance probably enough. So hopefully I've got it in a few times in the last 30 seconds, because loads of this, but all of this comes back to the performance. And the humans are at the centre of that. Lucy, I don't know if you've got any perspectives on just selling the need of this to the mid.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old study, isn't there, the Harvard Business Review, about the service profit chain in action, which is, and I'm sure the numbers have all been fully worked out in different organizations, but Richard Branson says it really well, doesn't he, in terms of happy team make happy customers that make happy shareholders. And I think God, happy, I won't say that word again, but that true engagement where people feel they're doing purposeful work, that they are contributing to something, they're doing that meaningful work, they're engaged, they're motivated, they feel like they belong, they perform. It's so important that you connect at that human level with people. It's a no-brainer for us, right? No-brainer, but
Thank you to everyone for asking such brilliant questions. Thank you to our speakers. I have a whole page of notes. I hope it's been insightful for everyone else that here. And actually, Natalie, I think you summed it up really well. It's in service of performance. You said we won't get the outcomes without paying attention to this stuff, and I think too often people underestimate that human component, and it's not going away. And we have to, if we're setting our organisations up for success, we have to help our leaders navigate that brilliantly. And that's what we do. We support some amazing organisations, just like Heathrow, organisations with huge change agendas. Thank you to lots of you for joining us today. I know we're working with you at the moment. Whole range of programmes from supporting execs and SLTs right through emerging and early in career talent. And we take the work really seriously because it matters. Like, when we get this right, it's catalytic for your organisation, but it changes the lives of the people who are leading in it and everyone that they support. So if you're curious about what that could look like for your organisation, we would love to chat to you. Connor, I think, is going to pop up a poll. If you'd like to have a conversation with us, with Natalie, with another member of the team about what's going on for you right now and how possibly we could support, we would love to offer you that session. And I'm going to end with a massive thank you. thank you to all of you for joining us. I really look forward to seeing you at the next event. More information to follow on that, but that's it from us for today. Thank you so much.